A good rule of thumb. It's probably not great when a memo from a state high school soccer official makes headlines, but a letter with sexist language directing high school referees to treat girls soccer players differently than boys sent last month did just that. The memo infuriated coaches across the state. I'm Andrew Thien, and this is Beat Check with the Oregonian. Up next, Nik Streng, high school sports coordinator for the Oregonian and OregonLive. We talked about the letter, the Oregon School Activities Association's response, what it says about the broader inequities in high school sports, what may happen from here, and some of the broader societal issues that have spilled over into youth sports in recent years. Here's our conversation. Nik Streng, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So, Nik, high school sports are still in their early season. School started just a few weeks ago, and it's things are ramping up now, but it's not often that a letter from the state's Activities Association makes news, but you recently reported on a letter that did just that. Can you talk about how that came on your radar?
Yeah, so I actually first heard about it because Milwaukee girls soccer coach Sarah Plymel emailed me about it, and she was, frankly, very upset. Sarah's been coaching girls soccer in multiple capacities for 20 plus years in Oregon, including in the club scene and the high school scene, youth scene. And yeah, she was very frank in the story when I talked to her. And she was even more frank in her email that she sent to me that included the letter. And also she forwarded me the OSA's kind of immediate response to it from Assistant Executive Director Molly Maxwell.
Can you describe the letter that she sent to you? Who wrote it, and what was the purpose of this letter?
Yeah, so the letter was the SRI Soccer Bulletin. That's very insider knowledge. SRI stands for Sports Rules Interpreter Bulletin. These are letters that you don't, the public doesn't see very often, just because they're very inside baseball. It's about as inside baseball as you get, and sometimes literally inside baseball, because it's very
exactly.
It's the SRIs are a position that the OSA has. They don't, work for the OSA, but they work with the OSA and the OAOA, which is the Oregon. It's the Officials Association.
Okay.
In this case, it's Patrick Duffy, who is the soccer SRI, Sports Rules Interpreter. He's been in his position for about 17 years, and these are just released whenever. Their job is to, keep track of trends in refereeing, to answer questions if referees have questions after a game, like, should I have done this differently? In this case, one of the trends that he saw was a major uptick in cards being distributed to girls during girls' soccer games. And he very blatantly just said, do not referee girls' games the way that you would a boys' game. Do not allow girls to play through contact. Girls don't want to play through contact the way boys do. And that's kind of where everyone just, eyebrows turned up everywhere. And we're like, that's not right.
Yeah. So unpack that a little bit for us. I guess disclosure, I'm married to a former soccer player who's a woman who, I've seen play before, and I've watched lots of women's soccer games. So I think I have a good impression of the quality of play and the toughness of players. Why was this a controversial and offensive statement?
It's just very blatant that they were saying like, hey, treat boys and girls different. It's very verbatim that girls are much less likely to want to play through some contact with opponents that boys typically want to shrug off. That's what Duffy wrote in his letter, and he said, you want to blow the whistle immediately and loudly. Do not wait to see if advantage is going to develop. And anyone who's ever watched soccer knows that that's just not true. Our soccer reporter Ryan Clark said it himself on Twitter that he watches the Timbers and the Thorns, and he's like, the ladies play through contact. The ladies play through contact more than the boys sometimes, because the boys are more like the Timbers are more likely to have a theatric, injuries the way that you see so often in men's soccer that you don't often see in women's soccer.
No, for sure. And I'm curious, in your experience, in your gig, and just, obviously you've got a lot on your plate with all the various sports, but was this an issue that you were aware of in terms of like the dramatic increase in red cards given to girls soccer players? Was this something that was coming across your plate or that you had witnessed?
I don't have any data for it, and I haven't seen any upswing in cards. And the coaches I talked to, they said it wasn't obvious to them, not having counted the cards to see like, oh, are they going up? They said it wasn't obvious that more players were being carded during games this year. Sarah Plymel, who the coach at Milwaukee, she did say that like the increase in cards for girls, if you're quicker at dishing out cards to girls than you are boys, you are actually, potentially impeding a lot of girls' ability to participate in sports, because when you get a red card, you're not only like disqualified from the game, but you can't play the next game. So you're taking these girls off the field as well, and that could have a serious negative impact on a lot of them.
Yeah, so it's not just an offensive statement. In practicality, if this is playing out, it might be negatively affecting, girls' love of the game and their ability to play the game. Right. So I'm curious, Nick. Obviously this landed, and it was, obviously you mentioned Ryan Clark, friend and colleague who covers the Timbers and Thorns, reacting, but it seemed like there was a lot of reaction to this. I mean, what was coming into your mailbox after you posted the story, and just can you describe the nature of the reaction?
Everything that I've heard has been, this is ridiculous. That why is this even coming out in the first place? Another colleague of ours, Jamie Hale, who covers travel outdoors, he said like this is the reason why his sister wanted to play boys soccer, because then she could have shoulder to shoulder contact and play a physical game, because she's playing tough against girls and just getting fouls left and right called on her, and said that was unfair. I think it was Eder Campuzano, former colleague of ours, said the OSA thinks that girls are too dainty, I guess, to play through contact the way that the macho men are. So
Patrick Duffy, the gentleman who wrote that letter, as you mentioned, he's not some new figure at the OSAA. He'd been there for 17 years. He apologized. And can you kind of describe what exactly the reaction has been from the top officials at OSAA? Because as you reported, this letter kind of contradicted the formal policy, right, of the agency overall.
That was kind of the big reason why I first started digging into this. It really clicked when I read Molly Maxwell's apology email to the OSA athletic directors, which is saying, she said, "We do not condone or support this message as it goes against our priorities of fairness and inclusion." And I said, oh, this directly contradicts the OSA's own STAR initiative, which is their anti-bias, anti-discrimination initiative that they've been putting on, which is really to handle these issues that happen at sporting events, and we've reported on quite a few of these.
Yeah,
and the letter just says treat boys and girls differently, and I said that's directly against what you yourself talk about.
Can you just describe, because Sarah, the coach of the Milwaukee team, isn't the only coach you spoke with. I mean, and obviously not the only one who's upset, but can you kind of describe other reaction from coaches you spoke with? And, if this is the guidelines being sent by, someone who's in a position of power to help influence refereeing, I mean, what did that say to these veteran coaches about the game overall in Oregon?
I talked with two other coaches, Grant High School's Manolis Chwanakis, who the Generals won Class 6A state championship last year. Really good program, really good club influence program. he very bluntly said, this is not fair. The treatment that girls get is not fair, and it's very obvious because he coaches boys and girls club, and he said, it's very obvious that they're being treated differently. And I talked to Steve Fenna, who's the Jesuit girls soccer coach, and I mean, he's won like 9 state championships with Jesuit. They're one of the best programs in the state.
Right.
He's been there for a long time. So, probably if you had to say like who might be the most respected head coach in the state, it's probably Steve Fenna.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very blunt, and he said that it's fair that referees interpret rules differently, which is, if you're talking about like baseball strike zone, every umpire strike zone is different. You just have to stick to it. That's a fair strike zone. But he said those interpretations should never be based on gender, ethnic background, or how a referee might feel a certain team wants to be refereed. He said, same game, same rules. Frankly, the bulletin is wrong in each of its versions, and a slight to all female student athletes. And it just he just said it straight. This is not good.
My impression from reading your coverage and talking to you and seeing the reaction is that, like, I mean, this was obviously a mistake, but it seems to have kind of unearthed some feelings that existed, maybe, not even really behind closed doors. I mean, obviously these were frustrations that coaches, at least the coaches you spoke with, who are, like you said, have been around the game forever, have had for years.
Yeah, definitely.
Why do you think it took this letter, I guess, to bring those reactions out?
I think it's just because this is really the first time where it was just displayed on an OSA document that said treat boys and girls differently. Because you're if you're a coach and you see that the girls can't be physical in a game, then you're just like, oh, this is the referee. And then, it happens in the next game, and it's like, it's the referee. And there's only so many referees, so you're going to see the same guys over and over again. But I think this was really the first time where it was like the state agency saying treat them differently, and then it's like, oh, that's from the top.
Where do you think this goes from here? I mean, obviously the season is still ongoing. How do you think this plays out going forward, Nick?
Patrick Duffy is still in his position. He's being required to take NFHS and OSA implicit bias training.
Mm-hmm.
The NFHS is the national level association that the OSA is under. I guess it's to be determined, how the soccer community reacts to, future bulletins and his involvement. This is just an uphill battle that is not new to the girls soccer scene, I guess. It's in talking with the coaches, this is just, they didn't start being treated differently this year.
Yeah.
This is just the battle that they've been in. And honestly, I think one of the big things that they're going to have to do is probably start getting some more female referees so they understand how to work with the girls, because that's what the bulletin screams to me is blow your whistle and give a card, because I don't know how to talk to a girl.
Yeah, no, I think that's a astute point. And let's stick with the referee piece, because you lead a coverage of high school sports across Oregon, and you've led coverage recently that kind of pointed to issues surrounding referees that maybe a lot of people who don't have kids in the game, or who don't go to sporting events, might not be aware of. And there's been a long-standing shortage of referees, right?
Oh yes, and so Shane Hoffman, who freelances with me and does really good work, did a 2-part series on the referee shortage in the state, and it's really a national issue right now that was really exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah.
Where a lot of referees were like, oh, I got nothing to do. And they go back to work one day and they're just like, oh, when I wasn't here, I wasn't being yelled at. And then they're like, oh, I actually don't like that. I actually don't like refereeing basketball enough to be yelled at by parents. So a lot of people quit.
Obviously, you're getting paid for your time, right? They're not doing it for
Yes.
free in some cases, or are they always getting paid?
The referees are paid.
Yeah.
They work through their respective referee associations. There's all different ones, but this is not their full time job. This is a part time evenings gig. So
Right.
so none there isn't a single referee in the state of Oregon that needs to be there.
How severe is the shortage, and like how is that playing out for people who might not have read the piece that you mentioned, or the two pieces you mentioned?
I think we are definitely we're way past the tipping point where it's affecting every sport. Just looking at this fall, there's football games every Thursday now, and there's football games every Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Teams like Jesuit, teams like West Lynn, are playing Thursday games on back-to-back weeks, and that's because of a referee shortage. So that referees can referee on a Thursday and then again on a Friday and then again on a Saturday, probably. Um, the in Bend, you know, Bend High School has one of the best 5A volleyball teams in the state,
Mm-hmm.
and they were playing double headers against Redmond and I don't remember who the other team. I think it was like Caldera, but you're playing back to back league matches, and that's because of a referee shortage.
Okay, so the athletes are bearing the brunt of it as well by having to, play multiple games in short order, and the stakes are higher, right? Especially when it's a conference tilt like that. I mean, that has implications
Mm-hmm.
for everything beyond. You mentioned earlier about the reading the OSA letter and feeling like this is a male voice who doesn't understand what it's like to work with female athletes. Are there a lot of female referees, or is it predominantly men across Oregon?
The referee scene is predominantly male and predominantly older male.
Okay.
That's in my experience, yeah.
And that could be, it could be any number of factors there. Who has
Yeah.
who has the flexibility or the interest in picking up side gigs, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's I don't know if there are any other factors at play there that make it a less appealing option for women from what you've heard.
Not necessarily. I don't really know what the driving force is for a lot of those. I mean, like, to be fair, like I was at a volleyball game last night, and volleyball referees are predominantly female.
Okay.
A lot of them are refereeing the sport that they used to participate in, but then that just varies. Like, you see a few female basketball referees, for example, but it's still a predominantly male gig.
Okay. Yeah, I won't ask you to to give a full picture across Oregon, because obviously it varies depending on sport and what part of the state you're in and whatnot. But
Mm-hmm.
let's just kind of close this out, Nick, by a lot of these issues we're talking about, whether it's fan behavior or the pandemic related shortage that you just mentioned, or just how the inequities between how boys and girls or men and women are treated. These are all societal issues, right? I mean, high school sports don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of our society. And you've also been reporting over the last, I feel like it's got to be more than a year now, about some racist incidents involving various schools. Can you talk about some of those incidents for people who might have missed that coverage and where things stand on that front?
Yeah, we've reported on quite a few instances of just racist incidents that took place at sporting events. It all started last year when Ryan Clark, who covers Timbers and Thorns for us, he was on the high school beat for about a month and a half, and we reported on there was an altercation at a LeGrand versus Gladstone football game, where Gladstone players just alleged that players from LeGrand were using racist words against them. And, after that, it kind of, we just kept hearing about certain things. The Benson girls basketball team went to Camas, and there was, racist words used towards them. Even as far, Malala, I think, basketball, there was an incident against Gladstone again. And a few schools in the state of Oregon, they were put on probation for a year. 3 schools in Oregon were put on probation for a year because of this. And this is due to the OSA STAR initiative. The OSA actually, explicitly steps in and says we are going to help investigate these incidents because we want to make sure that these stop happening. By forcing certain punishments, because up north, the WIA in Washington, they don't get involved at all in these. Like I reached out regarding the Camas Benson incident, and they said, "Oh, this is between the schools. This has nothing to do with us." But the OSAA took the opposite approach and said, "No, we are gonna step in and hopefully this stuff doesn't happen." So we've been reporting on a lot of those just to make sure that the OSAA is following its own words and actually doing something about it, because if they created their STAR initiative to stop these things, but if they're not doing their due diligence, then I think it's kind of just moot.
And so these schools that are seeing consequences, what does that mean for the athletes?
It doesn't mean anything for the athletes directly. It means that when a school gets put under probation for a year, it means that if an incident like this happens again, the next time something like this happens, if there is a next time, the punishment will be a little bit more severe. Yeah. It can include like fines. But when you get under probation, like everyone who's involved, like say you have a basketball game, you have ticket takers, you have the scoreboard operators, all sorts of people are involved. All of those people have to take the OSA's implicit bias training, and they have to, come up with a chain of command for reporting these sorts of things to make sure that they can be stopped as soon as possible. There's just a few steps that the school has to go through to, prove to the OSA that they are doing, their part to make sure this stuff doesn't happen.
And, we're about a month into the school year and the sports season. What are you hearing, if anything, so far this year? I mean, have you heard of any rumblings of bad behavior out there, or, are people generally just taking into action, hopefully in a somewhat respectful manner?
I would like to think that everyone says, "Oh no, if we have things like this happen, the Oregonian's going to show up and write about it." But no, I haven't heard anything yet. I will say that in terms of fall sports, I think you're more likely to get this kind of stuff in the postseason, because when you have playoffs, it's a lot of teams that don't know each other playing.
Yeah.
And that's when your student section is more likely to be, a little bit more offensive, because you don't like, if you're Tualatin Tiger don't like each other one bit, but these are kids who have to see each other all the time. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to, you're not going to dig into those kids too deep, because you're going to see them again in a couple of weeks.
Is there anything else I should have asked you? Obviously, you've got a lot on your plate, and as you've been laying out here today in this conversation, there's just so many interesting stories that you're sharing. Anything else you want to add?
I would say that, it's sports. Sports is fun. All the sports reporters love a good time. We love watching games, but in high school sports especially, I get to watch some of the best, teenage athletes in the state compete at a high level, and it's all, happy fun time. But sometimes it's not happy fun time, and you just gotta put your news reporter hat on and do some news reporting, and I know how to do that.
Well, you certainly do. Thanks for your coverage and for taking time to talk about it. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. I shared links to some of Nik's recent stories in the episode notes. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps others find the show. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.